All right. Thank you for coming, everybody. I know this is probably not the most exciting talk to go to, so I'll try to keep it entertaining, but I'll also try to keep it short so that if you do fall asleep, you can still make your next talk. So, just a quick introduction about myself. I'm Anthony Frehner. You can find me on GitHub and Twitter. I'm a single spot core team member, which is front-end microservices. If you want to talk about that, just hit me up afterwards or something like that. And also, I recently spoke at React Rally, a much more interesting talk, so I won't blame you if you would rather just put on some headphones and actually watch that talk instead of this one. But yeah, so a quick introduction to what we're going to be talking about. We're going to be talking about tests, which aren't very exciting to talk about. And even on top of that, we're going to be talking about mocking things. I did mainly focus on mostly on front-end things, but towards the end, we'll dive into some back-end stuff as well. So hopefully there's a little bit of content in here for you, no matter what side of the stack you're on. So yeah, we're going to be talking about how we can use Jest mocking capabilities to make tests easier, more reliable, and also so that they work as part of your CI/CD process, which is usually a good thing, right? You want to be able to run your tests and make sure that your deployments are going to work. So as interesting as that topic may or may not actually sound, you may be wondering, why would we want to talk about this? I came across a tweet the other day, and I'm just going to read it out for you. And it says, "For the love of F, trying to just test a thing that uses fetch is the most frustrating experience in my life. F this whole profession." Now, I don't know about you, but I can almost tell that there's like a little bit of frustration there, just maybe a little bit. And my goal for today's talk was to maybe provide you with some ability or some capabilities and some knowledge to be able to recognize that maybe this isn't as bad as I thought it was. And my goal isn't to make you write more tests or to write tests. Like, honestly, no one really writes tests, but yeah, we all write tests, right? That's what we tell each other. So my first thought was, how could we make this easier? Or could we even make it, dare I say, fun? And I would just like to introduce a function on Jest that's called jest.fun. Now, it's not actually jest.fun, right? It's jest.function. But to remember it a little easier, and for the purposes of this talk, I figured let's call it jest.fun. And what jest.fun is it's a mock function. Now, what does a mock function, what does that do? Here's the definition for it up on the Jest website. And we could read it over and be like, yeah, it erases the implementation and captures the calls and all that stuff. But I figured if we did that, then I would have already lost you, 2 minutes into this talk. So let's go ahead and skip ahead and figure out how would we actually go about using jest.fun. So here's a little example of it, a very, very simple example. And you can think of jest.fun as a wrapper around some random function where you can return whatever you want. So in this case, I want jest.fun to wrap this little function that returns the word hi. And if we were to look at it and save it as a constant, and we call that function, you'll notice that we get mock. So in this case, we wrap a function and we get mock out of it. That's all jest.fun does. So it's almost like you don't even know that you're having fun. That's how great it is. It's just there. So let's go a step further. Can we have fun with promises? Usually no, but today we will. Thank you. So for example, let's say you have in your app this cool API that just knows what your favorite emoji is. And I'm actually going to predict and tell you what your favorite emoji is in a minute. But when we're testing, we don't want to actually hit that API because hitting an API during tests seems slow and brittle and bad. And it really is. So let's talk about how we would write tests for this. Or in other words, how can we have fun writing tests for this? So let's start off with this fake promise. And it returns everyone in here's favorite emoji, which is the pig nose. Now, it's not a snout, and it's not a pig snout, but it's actually pig nose. So I just want that to be clear, okay? But let's say we have this fake promise, and it resolves just instantly with that pig nose. If we wanted to have some fun with it, all we would have to do is wrap that with jest.fun and return it. So in this case, when we call this fake API or this emoji API, what we're going to get back is that promise. And because it's a promise, we can use it just like any other promise and await it. And you can see that we'll actually expect it to be that pig nose, and it just works. So we're having fun, right? Fortunately, this works for pretty much everything that you can do. You can wrap promises, observables, things like that. So like if you wanted to just return an observable, you could just use of and return the observable that way. So let's talk a little bit more, let's get a little more real about this. Let's have some fun, but let's pretend like we have this component. And in this component, once again, we're going to just play around with an emoji API. And this emoji, this function that we import from this emoji.apis is a fetching promise. Is a f promise. And in your component, you would set some state based on that promise. And this is kind of, the set emoji is like the React hooks way of doing it, but this should work no matter what library you're using, Angular or Vue or whatever. So you may ask yourself, how would we actually go about testing that component? And especially since when you write your tests, this is how you interface with your component. You're not messing around with the internals of it. You're just rendering it. So how can we have fun with this? And I'm going to introduce the 3 ways that you can do it in a really simple way. Or the 3 steps, sorry. The first step, and this is actually optional, but I find that it tends to be a lot easier this way. And we'll talk about it in alternative in a minute. But the first step is to put your API requests in a separate file. And so you'll notice that, back to our example here, that was what we're doing here. So at the very top, we're importing that function, and then we're using it in our component. So that's step number 1. Step number 2 is we're now going to mock that whole file that contains all of our API requests. And the interface, or how we do that, is we do jest.mock. Now, what jest.mock does is it actually just wraps all of your exported functions and constants from that file in jest.fun. And so it just makes it's pretty much a convenience method for wrapping everything in jest.fun, so you don't have to. So, hey, that's pretty easy, right? You jest.mock that file, and now everything is wrapped in fun. And then all you have to do in order to test that is to define the new return value. So in our case, each function is already wrapped in jest.fun, so we're going to use a different method of doing it, which is mock return value, which is just a convenience method. You'll see that these two are actually the exact same, but since it's already wrapped in jest.fun, we can just do mock return value. So here's how it would work in our test is we'd write emoji API.mockReturnValue, and we'll do promise.resolve. And that's it. That's all we have to do. Now our component, when it hits that API, is just going to resolve with this promise that we've defined in here, and it's not hitting the real API. And that's as far as you have to go. So hopefully you're having fun with tests, right? Not really, but at least it's not as bad as what we originally thought it would be. So, and this doesn't even matter if you're using like a library like Axios or things like that. As long as you extract your APIs into another file and then use jest.mock, you can just arbitrarily determine what they're going to return. And that way you can test what your components are actually doing with the data without worrying about how they're getting the data. So let's get into some other potentially fun things and talk about other things you can mock. Could we mock a dependency? In other words, let's say you are using Axios and you don't want to have to pull your API functions out into a different file. You can still use jest.mock for this. It's as simple as just saying jest.mock of the library or the dependency that you have. and then defining, once again, the return value for each one of those. So in this instance, we're defining when Axios does a GET request, we're just going to promise.resolve with some arbitrary data. And this is like the Jest way to do it. I know that there's actually a Axios library or package for mocking itself out, but I feel like I found that there's actually more value to just use the Jest method of doing it, and that way your API with interacting with those mocks is consistent across all your different mock values. So it's kind of nice. So maybe we caught on to the fact that you can mock anything in your node modules. And that also means that you could mock your dependencies, but also your dependencies and things like that. So that's great. But could you also mock built-in modules? And fortunately, you can. So let's say, for example, you are writing a node server, and you have to read something from the file system, and you're using the FS package, or built-in module. Here is what you can do, is you mock FS, and then we're going to use a different function from Jest called mock implementation. And what that does is it pretty much just creates, once again, a jest.fun or function for you, but it allows you to gain access to what's passed into that function, which is necessary in like the read file API because it's a callback-based API. And so you execute that callback, you return and execute that callback with the fake value of what you read. And what this allows you to do is you don't have to actually commit a file to disk or as part of your repo, and you don't have to have that file as part of your CI/CD process. You've now just mocked out the whole FS library, and you can define for each time, hey, just pretend like there's a file there, and here's the contents of it. Can we mock a database? Well, sure. We'll just.mock it. In this case, in the database case, you'd probably be using a library to interface with that database. And so you just do it the same way. You just mock out the library that you're using, and then define your return values for each test, and you're done. Note that this is different than running like a temporary database in memory for your tests and stuff like that. But it's also potentially, depending on your use case, maybe a little bit better, because sometimes those libraries for the in-memory database are like behind, or they don't have the features you need, or things like that. So just.mock it. So with that knowledge that you have now, what do you do? And I'm not going to be the person that like admonishes you to go out and write testing. It's like everyone needs to write tests. That's probably not going to happen. In fact, I still don't write tests frequently. I'm trying to get better, but everyone has room for improvement. But my goal is, or my hope is, that when you are thinking about writing tests and and thinking to yourself, I'm not going to, but if I did, maybe it's not that bad. Maybe I can mock things out. If you do want to just play around with Jest and just try it out, it's actually pretty simple. You can run this command, npx jest init, and it will configure Jest for you. And so all that's left for you to do is just npm install your packages, like Babel Jest, and that's pretty much it. In addition, if you're using one of those create React app or Vue CLI or Angular CLI packages, usually Jest is already installed in those. And so it comes built in for a lot of cases as well. And if not, it's an easy way to get started on it. So with that, just want to say thank you for coming. I'm going to put these slides up on my Twitter account if you want to see, as well as my speaker notes and stuff. So hopefully you get some value out of it. But that's it. Thank you.